in order to give my view about the relationship between schooling and games and playfulness, I would like maybe to take a step back and to present yet another perspective of things that were already said. So the first question I want to ask: what is schooling at the time of accelerating change? And we live in times of accelerating change, which means that in very simple terms, it's a bit more complicated than this, but in very simple terms, it's the fact that the future is not like the past. If to summarize it in one sentence, accelerating change means that the future is not like the past. So now asking about what is the traditional ethos of education. Education is about cultural transference, mostly. We are the adults, we represent human experience. We know because we have lived for a while on this planet, and not only we know what we have experienced in our lives, we also represent what is the so-called ancestors. The ancestors in the tribal way of thinking, it was the ancestors were the repository of all the stories, of all the knowledge, of all the magic, which is guiding the living into the future. So this is the ethos. And our role as educators of new generation is to give them the knowledge of experience, but of our experience and experience of all of our ancestors, and this is actually the role, the primary role of education. But it is based on an assumption that the future will have some resemblance to the past. So the knowledge of our experience is really relevant for the future. Now, so from this standpoint that we know, we, the adults know, the new generation don't know, we have to find ways. This is like the thinking is that we have to find ways how to deliver knowledge that for them, for the young ones, for them now would seem non-relevant, but we know that it will be relevant. And a lot of understandings about gamification, and this was already noted by Ting Yen, is that gamification is made in order to artificially create certain sets of values in order to motivate young ones to engage in all sorts of activities of knowledges that are they don't seem relevant to them right now. But this whole scheme, this whole ethos of education is not, it doesn't seem to be true anymore. And it is not true anymore that we know that culture, tradition, and knowledge are really indeed relevant to the future generations as they used to be. So all this connection of the past into the future is a little bit shaky nowadays, and we have to find the new ways. So just this is the background that I would like to ask the question of what is the role of schooling, and and what I came up with, it's really very general at this point, but maybe the most important thing is to learn how to learn, not necessarily focusing on any specific team or discipline of knowledge, I'm almost. I also was caught by something that Gerard was mentioning in the School of Thinking. Is it would better be to teach research and strategy development, to teach children this. It would be very beneficial to teach about complexity and how to move, how to engage in an environment which presents not only accelerating change, but also increasing complexity. And the question that comes to mind, and I think there is a very good basis to ask this question, is the idea that the idea of games and the idea of playfulness can very, very well facilitate all these needs of educating future generations into a future that we only partially know and becomes more and more unpredictable in many senses. And the idea, the way that I think about games that makes them so wonderful context for this novel kind of education is that games are first and foremost are microcosms. They are each game, when you start playing a game, it's a microcosm. I think that Tini again already mentioned this idea of a clear setup of values and how to reach them as something which is so very fundamental in game design. So in some sense, and I don't think that it is for every kind of game, but there are a lot of, there is a certain category, quite a wide category of games that are, in some sense, we can see them as exercises in world building. And everything that I said, like teaching, learning how to learn, strategy and strategy development research, behaving in complex and unpredictable environment, dealing with uncertainty, all these things has to do with exercises of world building and also operating with this within these worlds while being built, and and also there is this extremely critical and important thing that I would like also to mention is that exercise in world building is not one world. It's exercises in world building when we build a variety of worlds. Each of them is operating according to different rules, different ideas, different value systems, and therefore such exercises in world building are also exercises in different worldviews. Coming to say that an environment that encourages schooling as gaming in the widest sense possible is just about that. It's about the ability to build worlds, to engage in world building, and also the ability to apply and move quite fluidly between worldviews, between value system, and this does not mean that, and I don't mean by that becoming like value relativist or ethical relativists, not at all. It's just a certain skill which underlies the development of values and a sound ethical system. So this all goes to kind of a metaphysical understanding, which is not each by origin is not Western but more Eastern, is that the whole universe is actually a game. Yes, and this is a kind of understanding, of philosophical understanding, I would say, that is underlying what I am trying to say here is that how we can start thinking about schooling not only facilitated by games or by gamification in order to create all sorts of kind of motivational bridges, but something which is much more profound and much deeper in this. And this brings me to maybe the way that I believe that this can work is what I call radical play. And by the way, I make a distinction. Maybe I will say a few words in a minute about it between games and play and playfulness. When I see games as the structurization of playfulness. Playfulness is like formless and game, and while play gains form and structure, it starts to be called a game. But anyway, it is a relationship between, more generally, it's a relationship between degrees of freedom and constraints that are characterizing each setup of a specific game. So this idea, the whole universe is a game, or the whole life is a game, and what it is something that what I call radical play. And radical play, it's a philosophical, it's a metaphysical idea, and maybe it might sound very high and very removed from here and now, but what I think radical play is all about is a relationship between a person, an individual's freedom and his ability to create, to express meaning, or meaning being expressed. And when I'm speaking about radical play as an educational perspective, is what I would like to teach new generations is how through playing games and how through radical play as a kind of a meta worldview, is to teach how to turn freedom to expressed meaning and vice versa. How to take expressed meaning, which is now not relevant anymore, and to extract back my freedom, which becomes a resource into the future. So this is the kind of this is the idea that where I see a visionary application of gaming and playfulness in schooling and education. And now I have a few more minutes. I would make a few more remarks. Those of you that were participating in the School of Thinking know it from the course that I gave there, but it's also in a paper which is it's already published. I don't know if it's already published in the.
It will be in 2 weeks, I think. This book.
In 2 weeks, okay. So I want to say a few words about games, and this the distinction between finite games and infinite games. Well, a finite game just in very few simple words, finite games are about winning. And winning also, it's about terminating the game, yes, because once somebody wins, the game is over. So finite games are finite by the very definition that the boundaries and the rules of the games, or the rules of the game are being predetermined before the game takes place, and the game terminates under very specific certain criteria, and there are always winners and losers. So this is the finite game. And in contrast, there is there is what the so-called infinite games, which are not about winning or losing, but about continuing playing. And this is something completely different. So I believe that in a school environment, both finite and infinite games are extremely important. We cannot do without one of them. And in this sense, finite games are what we can gain educationally from finite games is the idea of boundaries and rules, the idea that effort and reward are somehow associated, not always, but it's an it's important. It's an important idea. We learn about strategy. We learn about purpose and meaning in finite games because they are hyper clear, as it was mentioned before. We learn about winning and losing, not only the fact of winning or losing, but also the psychological side effects of winning and losing and how to engage with such situations. And of course, competition. Competition is can be a very strong driving force. In contrast to this, infinite games teaches us that play is more important than winning or losing on the grand scale, and this also relates to what I call radical play. Now, infinite games teaches us to play with boundaries and rules within the game, which is not something which is allowed in finite games. Yes, so instead of playing according to the rule, we also have to learn how to play with the rules, which is extremely important. But this, while knowing that we can play with the boundaries and the rules, but not everything goes. It also develops self-reliance, responsibility, context understanding, and many other very, very important value to developmental process. Also, infinite games can teach that I play only if I'm free to play, and if I play if I'm compelled to play, it's not possible for me to play really. So this understanding of freedom becomes much more concrete. It's not anymore something which is bound to abstract idea or to some kind of social habits of thinking or social understanding, etc. Freedom is a resource, it's material. Again, already mentioned is agency, a solid agency, a fluid, yet solid and self-reliant autonomous agency. And again, in contrast to finite games, the value of cooperation, because if we want to continue playing, we need to cooperate. We cannot just compete with each other. And the idea of course, of win-win situation versus win-lose situation and how to navigate among them. And all this understanding about games, they encompass playfulness as a primary value, and within this, everything else that I said, and that's more or less what I just short of 20 minutes, so I play according to the rules this time.